What is a W2 RIA model? That is today's question on the Transition to RIA question and answer series. It is episode number 155. Hi, I'm Brad Wales with Transition to RIA, where we help you understand everything there is to know about why and how to transition your practice to the RIA model. If you're not already there, start out by heading on over to transitiontoria.com, where you can find this entire series in video format, podcast format. There's articles, there's white papers, there's a vendor profile series, all kinds of things to help you better understand the model. Again, transitiontoria.com. Okay, in today's episode, we're going to be talking about what is a W2 RIA model that you could potentially join. Now, one of the reasons I want to do this episode is because I previously did an episode on what is a 1099 RIA model to potentially join. So I wanted to give the comparative here of what the W2 version of that looks like. Now, for those of you that are maybe not familiar with this lingo, 1099 and W2, essentially at a high level, 1099 is an independent contractor status where you as the advisor or affiliated with the RIA on an independent contractor status, often referred to as 1099. And in part, the reason we refer to these as 1099 or W2 is essentially that's the tax forms that are used to reflect what that income is. So 1099 typically refers to an independent contractor model, whereas W2, that's where you are an employee of a company. And so in this case, if you're affiliated with an RIA on a W2 basis, while you're a financial advisor of that RIA, you are doing so essentially logistically as a W2 employee advisor of that RIA. And so like I said, I did an example on the 1099. Now we're going to talk about W2. And then, another reason to make this episode is a lot of folks think of the RIA model, whether starting your own RIA, surely, or maybe joining one as a quote unquote independent option and independent affiliation, and that absolutely does exist, particularly with your own RIA or if you're joining a 1099 RIA model. But there is a W2 path as well, and traditionally we don't think of in this industry a W2 model as some sort of quote unquote independent model. So I did want to point out that actually does exist in the RIA space as well. Now, something I talk about frequently on these episodes is that there's a lot of different pathways you could go down potentially if you were to transition your practice to the RIA model. So for some of you, you might end up starting your own RIA. Some of you might end up joining an RIA, which is the topic of today's episode. There's a flavor in the middle of those. That's a big part of what I help advisors do is understand, hey, should you even be exploring the RIA model to begin with? And then if it does make sense to explore it, how do all these three different kind of pathways compare? They all have pros, cons. Why might you choose one pathway over the other? But as part of that process, if you conclude that maybe joining an RIA is ultimately going to be the best path for you, well, then within that pathway, there are a lot of, as I often refer to, flavors of different RIAs to choose from. And so something I will always suggest you do is do not jump to conclusions about what that entails. And so, for example, if you have maybe spoken to an RIA before that you could potentially join, or you've been told about an RIA you could potentially join, well, that particular RIA, whoever that is, has a particular value proposition and a particular model that they have designed their RIA of how they are going to work with advisors and ultimately the end clients as well. And that is their version, their flavor of what they feel is best or best aligned for advisors. But that doesn't mean that's all that's available. So, for example, just within the realm of 1099 or W2, those are very different models, very different approaches for you to consider. And then within, in this case, because this is what we're talking about today, even within the W2 approach, there's several different flavors that you could potentially consider. And so that's what I want to go through here next is what some of those flavors are in the W2 space, just to paint the picture for you of, hey, if you were to consider this and you were to consider joining RIA, you want to understand essentially all of the options, including the 1099. But if it's narrowed down to the W2 space, know that within that, there's multiple different ways to go about doing this. So to give you some examples, this is not an exhaustive list, but an example of some of these W-2 flavors. So the first one is where you can join an RIA and still own your book, still technically own your book. That is part of the value proposition of the RIA, is they put that in writing and say, hey, if you were to join, you will continue to own your book. If the day ever came one day that you want to go in a different direction and you wanted to leave, or maybe you do a succession at some point, hey, this is your book to sell, your book to take elsewhere, and we as the RIA firm won't try to steal those clients from you. So that model exists out there, W2, but where you still own your own book. Now, kind of next on the list is what I kind of call a wirehouse alternative type model. And what I mean in this regard is to say wirehouses out there typically do not explicitly say, or they generally don't say, hey, advisor, you own your book, you own your practice. They do not say that. At the same time, they often have you sign agreements that oftentimes can have non-solicit verbiage in it. So it's this kind of quasi, what's your status? Do you really own your book? Not necessarily, but at the same time, they talk about, oh, this is your quote unquote business that you're running, but yet they're going to put maybe some non-solicit language on there. And so there are RIAs out there that on W-2 basis you could potentially join that, again, they don't go so far as the prior example of explicitly saying, hey, you own your book. And it's this kind of, again, wirehouse alternative. And there's different reasons they would argue that's why they've set it up, and that can still be advantageous for you just for the same reason the wirehouses make that same argument. And so know that flavor essentially exists out there as well, which I will coin the kind of wirehouse alternative. The next example of a W-2 model is there are W-2 RIAs out there that part of their value prop is they say, hey, we'd love to have you come join our RIA. Here's all the wonderful resources we provide you. Here's how we support you. But as part of you affiliating with us, not only are you going to be W-2, we, the RIA, are also going to take a minority investment in your practice. And there's reasons that might be attractive to you. Maybe you're looking to take some chips off the table, diversify your net worth. For them, they would argue, hey, we feel we will help you grow and maximize the value of practice, and we want to essentially have skin in the game alongside of you with that. So hence, that's why they're making the partial investment. So know that exists as well. If you say, hey, I want to be a W-2 advisor, there might be a reason you want to take some chips off the table, or why that might be advantageous for you with that partial investment by the RIA you could potentially be joining. Kind of a further evolution of that is what I would call the partnership model. And this is one example of a partnership model. There's no official definition of partnership model, so different RIAs might use it in different capacities. But there are some W-2 firms out there that say, hey, advisor, you come join our RIA. You're going to be a W-2 advisor. You're going to be employee advisor of the RIA. You essentially bring and essentially contribute your book of clients to the RIA. And while you previously perhaps owned 100% of your practice, you're going to join and you're going to become a partner of the entire RIA. And essentially every other joining advisor that became a partner has contributed their practice to the overall RIA as well. And so now you will own, as opposed to owning 100% of just your practice, you're now going to own a slice of essentially all of the practices that are now part of this RIA. And obviously they feel there's reasons that would be to your benefit, and that might be very attractive to you. And so that partnership model exists out there, again, where you're essentially becoming a partner. You're essentially blending your book, your practice, your equity, however you want to say it, all together. Now, you're typically still the one servicing your clients. It's not like it becomes necessarily a whole team approach per se, but that the idea from an equity perspective, you're all becoming partners collectively of everyone's practice together. So, and generally in those type of models, you would be a W-2 advisor at that point of the RIA. Another reason you might find yourself in a W-2 advisor capacity is if you have sold your practice to an RIA. Typically, they want you to stay on board at least a short period of time to help with the transition. And in some cases, it might make sense for both you and the RIA that you stay on long term. But generally, in that case where you have sold your practice to the RIA, at that point, you're going to be a W2 advisor of their RIA going forward. Again, whether that's on a short-term solely succession purpose or longer term with an eventual succession as well. But that does exist, but that's almost always where you would be W2 advisor of the RIA at that point. And then the final example of a W2 type model, and this is not an exhaustive list, is there are RIAs out there that essentially have W2 advisors that are effectively, for lack of a better term, servicing advisors, where they basically say, hey, advisor, we're going to have you be a W2 advisor of ours. We're going to pay you a salary. Sometimes it's salary plus bonus. But hey, advisor, we, the RIA, are going to essentially give you clients both essentially on day one, and we're going to do the rainmaking, we're going to do the business development, we're going to bring in new clients and essentially hand them to you, and you're basically going to service those relationships going forward. So as opposed to you also having responsibility for growth and bringing on new clients, again, they are essentially doing that for you. You're essentially a service and advisor of maintaining those relationships. In almost every instance, that's done on a W2 capacity, again, either salary or something like a salary plus bonus. So that's not an exhaustive list, but it does hopefully at least help you understand how even within just the W2 side of things, there's several different value props out there, several different ways RIAs have set up. Obviously, they all feel they have built something that's most attractive to advisors, or at least the type of advisors that they're trying to work with. And that may or may not actually match with what your career aspirations are, both short-term and long-term, but it is good that there are these choices out there, right? Because for some advisors, it is a good fit. And you might be thinking about some of those and say, wow, that's not attractive to me, and why would any advisor perhaps want to go down that path? And so I just want to give a couple examples of where perhaps that is attractive. For starters, if that's your thought process or your mentality that, man, why would anyone want to do this W2 RIA thing? Well, if you are tuning in to my videos or listening on the podcast here, in many instances, you're probably pondering, well, you're clearly pondering the RIA path because that's why you're consuming this content. And as part of that, you might be in part saying, hey, should I start my own RIA? So a very typical part of the discovery process that I do with advisors and teams is to say, okay, again, what are all these different ways you can go about doing this? What are the pathways? And at times there's a lot of comparison where it's like, okay, hey, maybe I do want to start my own RIA, but maybe it might make sense instead to join an RIA. And when that's on the process, which typically it is, well, if you're maybe thinking about starting your own RIA, the comparison that you probably put alongside it is probably not a W2 RIA model. It probably is a 1099 RIA model, because that is much more close in economics and flexibility and the reasons you would be motivated to have your own RIA versus maybe a 1099 RIA. So just maybe catch yourself and say, well, who would consider the W2 model? Well, again, if you're coming into this thinking you might want your own RIA and you want something to compare it to, well, you're probably not the audience that the W2 RIAs are going after. They're going after people that maybe aren't even at all considering the idea of having their own RIA. So that subset of advisors does exist out there that may or may not be you. You might think, again, who wants to be a W2 advisor at an RIA? Well, keep in mind, there's thousands upon thousands of tens of thousands of W2 advisors at wirehouses now, and a huge majority of them will never leave the wirehouse world. Now, arguably, they maybe should, and they maybe should be considered an RIA path, but many won't ever leave the RIA model, or if they do leave the RIA model, they're just going to go to another wirehouse. And so, for better or worse, and we could debate it, but there are thousands upon thousands of advisors that are already W2 advisors now, and they're just at a essentially very large RIA at a wirehouse, and either they're content there, or they just can't bring themselves to ever make a change, or they don't even know about what a change would consist of. So it is what it is. There's always going to be some advisors out there, for better or worse, and arguably maybe they should be doing something different, but for better or worse, they're W2, and or maybe they have done their homework and concluded that that is the best path for them to either stay on that path or to just maybe go parallel and stay in that W2 realm. So that subset of advisors exists as well. And then the final thought there is there are, again, all these different value props, and each of these RIAs would make their kind of pitch of why their approach is best. But there are some that say, hey, advisor, you come join us as a W-2 advisor, and maybe they're going to take that minority investment. Maybe they're going to take buy all of your practice. And hey, over the balance of your career, here's how we're going to help you, and here's how you're going to get compensated. And they would perhaps argue that it's actually more advantageous for you for an economic perspective in aggregate over the balance of your career to take that path, where they might say, hey, yeah, come and we'll buy your practice now, but and you're going to be W-2 and you're going to be on a grid, but we're going to help you grow that practice significantly faster than you could have ever grown it on your own. And so in aggregate, even though you'll be essentially at a lower payout grid than maybe you could achieve on a more independent path, but we're going to help you grow your practice faster. And so in aggregate, you're going to be better off. Whether that bears out for you or not, whether that is attractive to you or not, whether they can actually back that up or not, obviously that's all to be determined, and that's in the details, and you have to get into the weeds on that sort of thing. But just know that that's kind of a way that it can be positioned. And I think for some advisors that does work out, and that is factually correct. But obviously there's a lot of assumptions there that have to be considered, and make sure that's going to be a fit for you as well. And then the final thing I'll just note, I've kind of harped on economics quite a bit here, with W-2 and how you're paid. And by the way, we didn't even get into that. Also impacts how you're taxed versus if you were in a 1099 or your own RIA type capacity. Taxation alone can be a big difference between those two. But the point is, while economics are important, I would also remind you, and for those that listened along to a lot of my episodes would know this, there's all different kinds of motivations for why advisors consider transitioning their practice to the RIA model, and it generally falls in one of two buckets. It's either economics, and then within that, there's several different variables, whether you're seeking higher current day income, better taxation, higher enterprise value of your practice one day. And then the other kind of main bucket is flexibility. So maybe how you can market your services, the brand you can build, the investment solutions you can provide to your clients. All different motivations advisors for having to do this. Economics is just one of them. So if you were to say, hey, is a W-2 RIA model perhaps a fit for me? First, you want to do some soul search, and that's where I can help you with this. Okay, what are your motivations for even considering maybe making a change? Is it economics? Is it something to do with flexibility? And oftentimes it's both of those. And hey, which of these pathways, if any of them, will achieve what you're trying to accomplish with your practice? And it might be a W-2 RIA path that could accomplish that. But the only way to determine that is to first understand, okay, what are those motivations? What are the options available to you? What are all these different flavors and all the different pros and cons, and why you might choose one over the other? And only then can you really conclude if it makes sense for you and your individual practice. And that's what I do for advisors, just to put it bluntly, is to the degree you say, hey, I probably should be exploring this. I probably should be peeling the onion back. I should be looking at all these options. That's the kind of conversation I have with advisors all day long. Happy to have that conversation with you as well. But like I said at the top, my name is Brad Wales with Transition to RIA. And first things first, head on over to the website at transitiontoria.com, where you'll find this entire series in video format, podcast format. There's articles, there's white papers, a vendor profile series, and at the top of every page is a contact link. Just click on that and you can instantly and easily schedule time to have a one-on-one conversation with me, whether you want to talk about today's topic or anything else RIA related. I'm happy to have that conversation with you. Again, transitiontoria.com. And with that, I hope you found value in today's episode, and I'll see you in the next one.